report on robberies and homicides every day, but a lot of people don't give much thought to what happens after someone is sentenced for their crime and then sent to prison for a life sentence. There's a woman, though, on the Central Coast that's made it her life's work to build a bridge between us and those on the inside. Ann Makovic visited her Transformative Justice Center in Monterey to find out why.
Prisons are considered the most traumatizing environment in the world, and for these individuals to be facing that on a day-to-day basis, already coming from intense trauma, to me it just feels like a gross indecency. The intervening factors of what leads people to deviancy, as we say, poverty, homelessness, addiction, racism, intense familial abuse, neglect. And sometimes it's not anything. There's so many people in prison that are innocent. They never got the resources they needed to get out of that pipeline. There are so many people that just needed help and they never got it. So what we're doing now is trying to help.
Welcome back, everyone, to Where Empathy Lives, the space where we dig into justice, community, and the ways in which we can work towards building a more equitable world. I'm your host, Destiny Jimenez, and today we're talking about transformative justice. We'll be discussing what it is, why it matters, and how it challenges us to rethink absolutely everything we've been taught about punishment. But before we begin to understand transformative justice, we have to discuss the conditions it emerged from. According to a 2024 report titled Mass Incarceration Trends, published by the Sentencing Project, the United States faces a pressing social issue in the form of mass incarceration, deeply impacting marginalized communities nationwide. A justice system focused primarily on punishment has led to millions being imprisoned while failing to acknowledge the underlying causes of their actions or providing opportunities for personal growth. As individuals become more aware of these injustices, transformative justice is gaining recognition as a meaningful alternative to traditional punishment. Research done by Candace Smith in her article, Restorative Justice and Transformative Justice, Definitions and Debates, explains that transformative justice not only addresses the immediate harm caused by crime, but it also recognizes the structural conditions such as poverty, racism, and social marginalization that make harm possible. In essence, transformative justice aims to create lasting change that extends beyond individuals to reshape the communities and systems in which they live. To guide us further through this conversation, I visited the Transformative Justice Center on 439 Tyler Street in Monterey, California, and spoke with founder Megan McDrew, someone whose work sits at the intersection of education, empathy, and reform. I asked Megan to start our discussion by grounding us in some definitions. I shared that I understood transformative justice as something that grows from the foundation of restorative justice, but pushes those ideas even further. So I asked her if she could explain both frameworks to me, and here's what she said.
Transformative justice and restorative justice are very similar. A lot of people don't really see the difference, but so restorative justice, the best way I could explain it, restorative justice really focuses on a two-way dialogue between two different parties. So it's a lot about reconciliation when a harm's been done, and that can be between a community group and an individual, or two families, or parents and children, or what they often call like victim offender. Transformative justice can do the same thing, but it's really not focused on a reconciliation process, as it's more systemic. So transformative justice does two or three things. The first is a transformative justice model tries to take the power away from the police or the prison system when it comes to ameliorating or resolving a harm done, and they try to have what they call a community response. They do this through like training of neighborhood committees, neighborhood call systems, having like conflict mediation centers in town, restorative justice, centers or organizations. So the whole idea is to not involve the police state or the state in general, because the idea with the idea that the fact that exists is that the state is considered the major perpetrator of violence and harm. So why include the state when we're trying to resolve a harm or some kind of violent incident? Because in the end, it almost always increases the level of violence, especially towards the offender. Transformative justice also tries to understand the conditions that lead to the harm. So while in a restorative justice dialogue, the best example I read once was when, let's say, an individual steals bread from a bakery and the person gets caught. So in a restorative justice model, the thief would meet with the owner of the bakery company, and there would be a conversation, and there would be some sort of remedy or solution where maybe the thief has to do community service hours or something in a transformative justice way to keep them out of prison, because in the end that doesn't really solve the problem or make the person who's the survivor or the victim, so to speak, feel much better, like the situation's really been resolved. But what transformative justice does in that situation is they don't only have a restorative justice dialogue, but they try to look at the deeper issues of why is this person stealing bread in the first place, and what can we do to heal that situation. So in this story, the obvious answer is poverty, right? Nobody's stealing bread because they have money to buy it. They're in an impoverished situation where they feel forced to do something. So a transformative justice model really seeks to understand the conditions that give rise to harm. So things like poverty, social class stratification, racism, violence in homes, abuse, addiction, the foster care system, homelessness, things like that. And so as social workers or as people that care, about different social problems in society, we're not only trying to make sure there's amends between individual parties, but we're trying to look at the deeper issues that cause those individual issues to arise.
After hearing her break down the distinctions between restorative and transformative justice, the conversation moved into something more personal, her own connection to this work, specifically when she first encountered transformative justice and what inspired her to create the center.
I first started thinking about just the word transform when I started learning about the prison system, and especially about prison abolition. So of course I taught at UC Santa Cruz for 6 years, and a very famous prison abolitionist named Angela Davis taught there before me, and I've read a number of her books and watched her speeches and follow her. I taught her book in one of my classes called Are Prisons Obsolete? And I started learning about abolition. I joined an abolitionist book club. I started reading abolitionist literature. And I came to the conclusion that I am not so much a prison abolitionist, but a prison transformer. So what that means is I'm less interested in obliterating prisons. I used to have this image of like a wrecking ball tearing a prison down, which I think would be a great idea when it comes to the architecture of prisons and how prisons are really created in these cell environments and these cages. And so yes, I would like the prison to be redesigned, but with that said, I'd also like the prisons to be transformed. So I love in Brazil and other places, they're starting to call prisons like centers of rehabilitation, and they've even done that in San Quentin. So that comes with a name change, but with the name change also comes a structural change and a change in the entire environment of how people are treated when they're incarcerated. So I believe prisons serve a function in society. If you think about sociology, there's all these theories. There's one called functionalism. So one would see the function of prisons to remove people from society that are causing harm. That's a great thing that needs to happen. But the whole cause that I'm invested in is what next. So I believe in prison transformation. So when I started thinking about, gosh, what kind of justice center do I want to open? I literally thought, I'll call it the Transformative Justice Center. And then I learned that there actually is a term called transformative justice. And that's actually when I learned about what transformative justice means, and that those puzzle pieces just came together. I wanted something a little bit more than restorative justice, because my goal in life is really not to just have victim offender dialogues or to kind of work on this macro level, but I'm really looking at systemic change that we can make within the prison system. The Transformative Justice initially was opened at UC Santa Cruz in Kresge College. They gave me an office. And the beautiful thing is, when I walked into that office, there was a little Post-it note on the wall, and they said, whoever walks into this office should know it's a magical space. I was in this office for the last 10 years, but before me, it was Angela Davis's office, and it was painted all pink. And the woman before me that was in the office taught transformative justice at UC Santa Cruz for 10 years, and then they hired me to teach that course. So it was all really serendipitous. So that's how the name came to be. And then once I received a grant to expand my services from outside the prison into the community, I decided to start looking for a physical center to lease in Monterey, and that's how I came to 439 Tyler Street.
Her story makes it clear that this work has a life of its own, finding the people who are meant to carry it forward, almost as if it was meant to be. One of the most powerful initiatives the center offers is the Empathy in Action Bridge to Redemption program. The program brings students, community members, and incarcerated individuals into the same space, challenging everyone to rethink assumptions about harm and accountability. I asked Megan to explain the goals of the Empathy in Action program and what a typical session involves.
The goals of the Empathy in Action program is really, the goal is transformation. So that goes back to the Transformative Justice Center. The whole idea, I believe in life. I mean, beyond to give life meaning, which I do through service and through connection to others and myself and nature, is to grow and transform and to continue to work to become the most kind of godlike versions of ourselves that we can. You know, our divine capability to be kind and loving and generous and selfless to a point, all takes practice. And I believe on both sides of the wall, people need tools, and we need relationships, and we need the environment in which to grow and transform. And much can be done alone through vision quests and meditation and different retreats and things like that. But so much growth happens in community, in classrooms, in families, in friendship circles, and in therapeutic groups like we do in Empathy in Action. So really the overarching goal, I call it an arc of transformation, what happens over the 8 weeks. So that's the format of Empathy in Action. It's an 8-week program that's offered year round, and we start always with a poem or a book excerpt that we use week 1 where nobody knows each other. So we use that as kind of a foundation to break the ice and to begin this process of transformation through vulnerability and truth-telling. And then week 2, we move into empathy and what is transformative justice. And we start to try to think about how we've used empathy when we've needed empathy most and when we've lacked it too. Week 3, we get into conflict resolution, conflict transformation, and understanding relationship patterns, as well as healing our wounded inner child. Week 4, we move into trauma. And in juxtaposition of that, we get into resiliency. Week 5, we get into societal inequities. We talk about the school to prison pipeline and also race and racism. Week 6 is really rooted in gender exploration, a little bit of sexuality, but not too much. And then week 7, we finish with love and loss, exploring grief and shame. And week 8, the last week of the program, is always a final performance night and a graduation ceremony where we hold what equates to like a talent show, and everybody celebrates and just enjoys each other's company while having dinner together.
With the program laid out, the discussion shifted to the deeper questions at the heart of transformative justice. What happens when society turns its back on those who are incarcerated?
I believe when we fail to care about people who are incarcerated, I believe we begin to lose our own humanity and our own sense of care and forgiveness. We live in a state of fear and division and anxiety and perhaps hate, although I believe the root of hate is fear. There are so many misconceptions and misunderstandings about who's in prison and why and their potential for change. And until you actually go inside and you meet people who are incarcerated, or you spend time with people who have been formerly incarcerated, so you get to know prisoners in one form or another, does that shift from fear and anxiety and hate and division and judgment and dehumanization of the other because you've never met them and you have no idea, really begins to shift into this place of, wow, at the very bottom is curiosity, and then from there might come awe, inspiration, admiration, and that's what happened with me, and I started to just feel this incredible urge to then share it with others.
As Megan emphasizes, the program creates an environment with incarcerated individuals that is in a way profoundly ironic, a safe space inside a system built on confinement, a space where everyone can contribute to each other's growth and where connection reminds us of our shared humanity. The power of this transformative justice movement lies in the work of people like Megan and everyone involved in her programs. These are people willing to challenge the systems around them and imagine something better. I hope today's episode leaves you feeling a bit more empathetic, curious even. If you are someone who believes that people in prison don't deserve a second chance because they never change, it's worth asking, how can we expect transformation to happen if we don't provide the tools for it? Change is possible and people are ready to grow, but only when the world around them believes they can. Mia Mingus, in their 2019 article, Transformative Justice, A Brief Description, wisely states, ultimately, transformative justice understands that we have a collective responsibility when it comes to violence, and that no one is born knowing how to rape or torture. These are learned behaviors. Transformative justice is a collective response to violence within our communities, and it requires that we understand that it is not about locking up a few bad apples, but that violence is a necessary norm in our current society and actively encouraged. The current rates of domestic and sexual violence are at epidemic levels, and violence against oppressed communities is extremely pervasive. Violence is collectively enabled, has a collective impact, and requires a collective response. This does not excuse people's harmful behavior or mean that a person who has caused harm or been violent doesn't need to be accountable for their actions, but it does mean that we need to understand the context in which harm and violence happen. There are countless ways to rethink the nature of prisons and redefine how we respond to crime, but there's nothing quite like transformative justice. It is rooted in the radical idea that no one is beyond the possibility of change. Thank you for joining me, and may this conversation leave you thinking and daring to step closer to the places we're taught to ignore.
I just encourage people to challenge themselves in ways that force them to understand things that maybe they haven't understood fully. And you can only really do that by getting close to what you care about. So I do want to share that going into prison while we're in environments where people have committed violent crimes, not always, not everybody, it's an incredibly safe space, which is kind of the irony of it all. And so I want to dispel any fears or apprehensions people have about their own personal safety by saying that, and we make sure that people, can grow and contribute to each other's growth in this kind of safe space. So that's about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan.
Good job.